So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leandro Parente, and I'm a researcher at OpenGeoHub. And so, in the idea with this talk is really explain how we are doing this movement, right? So, from modeling and using machine learning to actually some production environment and produce at a continental and global scale. So these slides are accessible, so you can access them using the QR code and also the short URL. You can also have access later. You just send the link to Serpent, so and you can have access to all the links that I will show here. So basically, that's the outline of what I will present to you. So I will start with the introduction of OpenGeoHub, what we do and core activities. Because of course the work that I will explain here it's very aligned with the mission of the foundation, and I will explain what is the current machine learning pipeline that we are using to run basically spatial predictions and how we optimize the different parts of the pipeline. So maybe you are familiar with the concept, but I will explain how we are implementing basically analysis ready and cloud optimized data, and what are the advantages to use that. And to really demonstrate, I will show the new data set that we produced, basically Landsat cloud-free aggregates. And we are working also to expand this work for Sentinel. Explain about feature engineering, feature selection, challenges related to really go for spatial predictions and what you need to be aware want to really scale. It's necessary to really scale up the data. So most of what we do in our internal infrastructure, and I kind of learned that with Surf, that basically our infrastructure, it's high throughput data processing. So it's HPC, it's more generic term, but because we deal with a lot of and large amounts of data, the throughput of data is really some remarkable aspect, and we need to really have pipelines and optimizations considering it. And I will finish the presentation explaining the last product that we launched, that it's part of the Global Pasture Watch mapping initiative. So it's really a real world application considering all the concepts that I'm presenting here. So basically, OpenGeoHub, it's a foundation. And we work really to promote like culture of open development, open data, open source, open science, right? And so basically, it's an independent, non-profit research foundation that utilizes machine learning, geocomputation to produce and share like geospatial data and really to support different users and communities. And so basically, this is our management board. It's composed by Dr. Tom Hengel. He actually is like a former student. He did a PhD here at ITC, and Dr. Shani Wheeler and Dr. Edzer Pebesma. I always have troubles to say that. Edzer is a very well-known person that really has some solid contributions for the R community. So he developed most of the part of the SF packaging, and he's based in Munster. So you can think that, okay, maybe this kind of description of what the OpenGeoHub is doing was forged by the management board, but not really. So the definition that I showed to you, we are just it's just something that I use in the Google Notebook LM. So probably you are familiar with that, but I feed it all, not all, but most of the content that OpenGeoHub has in the website. I just put it here, and I asked it, okay, let's see if it's really working. So I please describe OpenGeoHub in one sentence, and that's actually the definition that I showed to you in the last slide. And it's also interesting because you can do like a podcast with that. So if you want to, and the podcast is completely AI generated. Some of you probably know that. And I actually sent that in the group, and it was a bit like scary. I just said that, okay, it's a podcast. Someone is talking about OpenGeoHub, and later explaining that this was really generated by Notebook and Lab. So we don't have nothing to do with the Google Notebook ML. It's just something that I brought here just to break the ice and start the presentation. But it's pretty cool. I listened to the whole podcast, and it makes pretty sense, like a lot of sense. So OpenGeoHub, basically, we have some core activities, and I organized them in really 4 main components. So data organization and data harmonization. So basically, considering raster data, maps, vector, points, polygons. So, and this includes lots of like data sets that are not really necessarily produced by us, but we do some effort to repackaging it. So I will show some examples. So there are some data sets that are maybe available in Zenodo, like styles, and we just download that and do some work of aggregation or mosaic, and we just make available to improve the accessibility of that. That's part of our work, and of course, we also do that for most of the data sets that we use as input for the modeling. So I will show some examples that in the next slides. So we also do data processing, data production. So we have some data sets that are really core, and we are working for years now to maintain and to keep updating. It's mostly raster data, but we also release like the point data. So for point data, most of the point data that we have, it's actually like harmonized. So for example, Tom, the director of OpenGeoHub, he worked for years harmonizing soil organic carbon data. So we also have like a PhD student that worked also a lot harmonizing 3 species data. So this harmonization effort, it's also something that takes a lot of time, and we do also in the what I call reference data. So basically points and polygons, and this is also like part of the output that OpenGeoHub is generating. So we also develop open source, open data solutions. So most of the data sets are available in Stack. So spatial temporal asset catalog, so data catalogs in general, packages, and we also develop computational notebooks. And lastly, but not least, we have the communication and dissemination component, so video records, hackathons, summer schools. And this is also like a very important component because it's where we really try to promote all of this work that we are doing for several years now. So, and it's important to explain that the what we are really aiming to do here is what I call like full replication. So when you think about reproducibility, and that's something that everyone is really talking more recently now in the science in general. So you have this kind of old paper that tries to establish the concept of a reproducibility spectrum. And it's not like a binary variable, right? So you can have like only the publication on one side, you can have the publication in the code, but the code like without documentation, but only the code is already a bit better than only the publication. And you can move more and more, right? So code and data, linked and executable code, so documented and fully replication. So what we are really trying to do is we are aiming the full replication. So once we publish something, we try to put the data, the reference data, the output of the maps, the code, notebook explaining that. Some of the papers, they also create some packages. And also we put the data in different platforms because we know that different communities, they use different platforms. So when we really believe that doing that, we can really promote and help open science in general, right? But okay, that's cool, but how exactly we are implementing that, right? So all this process, it's okay, that's kind of the general overview. So I will really try to split different parts of this pipeline and explain how we effectively and we are doing that in practice. So most of our work, it's basically in the pipeline that I will present here. So we do some work also with kind of process-based models or some kind of temporal aggregation, but most of the products we use really machine learning applied to spatial predictions. So, and when we talk about spatial predictions, we need to have as input basically 2 data structures. So we have training data, training samples. In general, most of our training data is in situ points, but we might also have polygons, right? But because some variables, some environmental variables, they are really point dependent. So when you go, for example, for soil organic carbon data, it's basically one coordinate that someone dig a hole in the ground and took the measure of lab, right? And you have this in a kind of a table. So you have like some measures from tree species, some forest inventory data. This might be a plot, but most of the data is point-based. So we have this as reference training data. That's the input that will teach the machine learning model, basically. And we have what I'm calling here analysis ready and cloud optimized data sets. And so basically harmonized, gap filled, and consistent spatial layers. So it's a big difference of something like when you have something that is really ARCO, analysis ready and cloud optimized data, it's really ready to put as input in a machine learning model. And you can think, okay, you have a lot of Earth observation data available now, Landsat, Sentinel, Sentinel-3, Sentinel-1, but there are several pre-processing steps that you need to implement to make this data suitable to feed the machine learning model. If you have gaps, you might have clouds, some data is missing, so and all of that it will impact, right? So you can, there are different ways to do that, and here we will show what we are doing, how we can, how other users can basically take advantage of these pre-processing steps and develop a further pipelines. But so you have like raster maps, Earth observation data, these ARCO data sets, and reference samples. So the first step that we do is what we call here space and space-time overlay. So this concept is, I will explain in practice, but some libraries, they call these different terminologies. So maybe extract value from raster and things like that. But for example, here, I just took some example here in close to the university. So you can see that red dot, that's basically like a point. So I could go in the field and just say, yeah, this is like some tree species, it's exactly in this point, right? So, and what you see in the right, it's basically the response of a Landsat data. So this is a SWOR1, a spectral band. This is like a composite. I will explain how we did that for November, December on 2022. So the space-time overlay that we call here is mostly like space. It's literally get the pixel value of that coordinate, right? So you go with that coordinate and say the pixel value here is 0.108. So if you match this coordinate, imagine that this coordinate was obtained in the field or by visual interpretation in the exact year of this image. So you can also match this in the time. And we might have another point that is, I don't know, from 2000. And we also have images from 2000. So when you match also in the space, in the time, we have basically what we call space-time overlay. And if you do it with multiple layers, we have something that we call like classification and regression matrix. That's the input for the machine learning pipeline, right? So this is just one column that I'm showing here. And the columns, the raster maps, they become columns. The individual samples become, they basically are mapped as individual rows. And if you just have more columns, more variables, maybe precipitation and DVI, some Sentinel data, or even some existing map, you can basically add more and more data, and you have this ready to go for your machine learning pipeline, basically. But as I explained, you have a lot of pre-processing steps to have this data available in a format that you can really use for machine learning. So what I'm showing here is like a analysis ready and cloud optimized data that we organized for Landsat. This is global scale. So when you can check in the beginning of the animation that everything is complete, right? So we did a lot of imputation, gap filling, there are also different terminologies for that, but it's basically removing clouds and interpolating values. So you can have this in a way that you can fit the model, but of course you don't want to add some bias and things like that. So it's quite a lot of work to do it also. So in this image that I'm showing, it's huge. It's about 134 gigabytes, but it's in a cloud optimized geotape. So you can easily get this URL that is here. You can open it in your QuantGIS or in your Python notebook, and you can access that. So because you have different structures of overview, so you can easily see the whole world or zoom in some areas. And that's actually what I like most of the cloud optimized geotiff. So it's basically like a format that it's kind of prepared and suitable for cloud structure. And you have basically these three principles. So you have compression to get the data in a very effective way. You have the styling overview, right? So when I see the whole world, I'm actually just seeing like a small portion of the data that was pre-processed and indexed in the file. So all this image here, maybe it's actually 5 kilometers. But there was some pre-processing to organize the data in this structure so you can easily access and even do computation with that. And of course, you can also access that with the URL, HTTP. That's why I put the URL on top. This URL is valid, by the way. So once you host that in some cloud infrastructure, so you can have literally like hundreds of clients just accessing it and maybe reading different portions of the word and doing other processing, so compute NDVI on their fly and things like that. So that's actually basically kind of the principle and how the Google Earth Engine operates. But of course, Google implemented that, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe. So, and they were like upfront, but now we have in the open source world this technology in place, so we can actually have some similar solution that kind of mimics the functionalities of the Google Earth Engine in a computational notebook. That's also something that we are trying to work and contribute. Specifically about this Landsat data, so basically we did a lot of pre-processing, so we removed clouds, we did like temporal composites, and we implemented some kind of time series reconstruction for pixels where we had gaps, right? And we did that for the whole world. So, and we used it like harmonized Landsat data, where all the reflectance of the Landsat 5, 7, and 8, they were harmonized by University of Maryland, Matt Hansen's group. So we have access to this data. I will show how it's kind of hosted in our infrastructure. But we implemented this whole pipeline now, and we produce at Landsat bi-monthly reconstructed data. So it's about kind of 100 terabytes. So we are still building the mosaics, but the publication is out. Now it's out for 2 weeks, I think. And here we explained the whole process and how we did also some tests to evaluate the performance of the gap filling and the reconstruction of the time series. So we also hosted the data in the stack format. So here's an example for the SWOR 1 band. Actually, SWOR 2, it's SWOR 1. We also had it for the NDVI, and also we did some yearly aggregates. So you can access the data in the same way that I'm explaining here using the OpenLandMap stack. We also developed a QuantGIS plugin. So with this plugin, you can basically connect with this stack and just load this data directly in your QuantGIS. And there is an advantage on that you get also the legend and the colors. So, for example, for this data, this is a data that it's an example of data organization and repackaging that we did. So this is basically the GLC FCS30D. It's not a very catchy name, but this product was developed by the Chinese Academy of Science, and they basically mapped the whole world, I don't know, more than 30 classes from 85 to 2022. And the data, it's in the Zenodo, also in the Google Earth Engine. So basically we downloaded that and we created the mosaics and we host it here. So in our infrastructure, of course, we put the reference and everything. So this is not our data, but we just trying to facilitate that. We also put it in the OpenLandMap. And if you use the plugin, like this one, you can load this map with the legend. And it seems okay, it's just a legend, but it's some work, because if you just have the data, you need to do these mosaics, and they don't have, for example, the legend in the KeyML or some styling format. So, and all of that, we just organize it in the stack. We also have the legend file here in SLD and in the KML. So basically, you can basically open directly using our QuantGIS plugin. So we are also developing like a stack catalog only for in situ data. So we have a few examples here, and when I call in situ, it can be also some data from visual interpretation. So we have some reference points for grassland available here. We also have we will have some points available for the FluxNet data. So, for example, gross primary productivity, FAPAR, and things like that. So this is part also of one of our projects, the Open Earth Monitor. And we also will expand this data, this catalog with a few global layers, but also European layers that we are producing inside of this project. Okay, so let's back to the pipeline. And so basically, I talk a lot about the ARCO data sets. And now, considering that we have this data in place, we have the reference data also in place, and we can do this space-time overlay. Once we do that, we can have that classification matrix, and we can run kind of a machine learning pipeline, right? So this is nothing special. So we do some hyperparameter tuning. We select some of the features. So in general, what we do is basically we start with maybe hundreds of features, and we try to select what are the features that correlates more with the target variable by kind of a data-driven approach. I will show some examples, but for example, if you are modeling soil organic carbon, maybe some of the Landsat bands will be more relevant than if we were mapping like land cover classes. So it depends of of course, the target variable, what we are trying to modeling, but the feature selection is something that we try to do in a very automated way, and later we do some inspection to see, okay, it makes sense or not. And we do this process, and so it's a long process. So you need to test, check the results back again, and see, okay, maybe this variable is not working. Let's do another variable. And understand what will be the implications of that in the final model. But once you have the model, you can basically go for the prediction. So we have also this work that it's in preprint. So this is basically the Landsat data that I show with some additional indices that we developed for Europe. So basically, we developed NDVI, we computed some number of seasons and crop ratio, and also like bare surface, bare soil fraction and things like that. So everything is kind of documented here, and this data it's organized in different tiers. So we have annual predictors and monthly predictors, different variables. And here, for example, we did the analysis to see what correlates more with the soil organic carbon regression. And you can see that, as expected for the soil organic carbon regression, the long-term predictor, it makes more difference, and it's actually produced the higher accuracy, basically because the carbon in the soil is kind of a long process. So when you have a long-term average, like 20 years of some NDVI value that will correlate with the vegetation, it will also have implications in the soil. So, but if you use, for example, the same data for the land cover classification, actually the best it's used the bi-monthly bands. And in this case, because for some of this land cover, you really have like crops and seasonality. And if you just have like annual aggregates or some value that doesn't capture the intra-annual variability, the land cover will not basically be mapped very accurately. So this is just some tests that we did to illustrate the usability of this data set. This manuscript is under review. And so considering the pipeline that we use, basically, this is more like a generic approach. But when you go to the implementation level, you can select there are different ways to do it. So for the hyperparameter tuning, basically we use this successive halving search. So it's similar to some genetic algorithm, but you have some set of hyperparameters in the beginning, and you start find which is the most accurate, and you start to increase the number of samples and just select what are the best that you have in previous iterations. So we also use this recursive feature elimination, where we basically drop some of the less important features and do several refitting. And for most of the machine learning models that we use now, because we rely only in points, we are talking about random forest, gradient boosting tree, and artificial neural network. That's basically the core that we use.
But of course, there are other models that we test, but in the end, these three models, they basically stick out. And okay, so once we select the models, we do all this process, we can move for some model performance, feature importance, but also the predictions, right? And specifically for Earth observation data and the spatial predictions, the prediction is where you have the most of the computation time, and it's a bit it's not intuitive. Some other domains, they have kind of the other way around, but in this case, the number of data that you need to run the predictions, it's really like way more than what you're doing for training. So because you can train just to use a few points in Europe, maybe hundreds of thousands, for sure some thousands would be better. But when you go for the prediction, you need to predict all the pixels in Europe or in the world. And if you're talking about 30 meters, that's like really billions and billions of pixels. And if you have time series, it's way more data. So, and that's why you really need to have some optimization in this step. So, and one thing that we also notice is you might have some difference in the accuracy that will increase a lot the computation time. So we always try to balance what is the accuracy in the model, but what is effectively, how effectively we can use that to run some prediction at global scale. So we always do some kind of optimization in the prediction step, to also considering that we might lost, I don't know, 0.1% of accuracy, but this will be speed up the pipeline, I don't know, 5-10 times. So, and here's an example. So this is basically a result of recursive feature elimination. And we can see here's the log loss. This is basically a metric for probability of classification. And we can see, so lower here is better. And we can see that with about 100 trees, I have almost no improvement in the 100 features, sorry. I have almost no improvement in the prediction, in the accuracy. So we basically select, instead to use 200 variables, let's use just 100 variables, but we select these 100 variables, really removing the worst variables in all this process. So this is basically a result of a recursive feature elimination using the random forest. Okay, so, and when we move to the prediction, so it's basically what I'm calling here in the context of the talk, this kind of the production level. We really need to be aware of also about this data reading, prediction time, and also data writing. So if I use 100 variables, I need to read all these 100 variables, organize in a way that I will fit the machine learning model. So, and I run the prediction, but I also need to write back. So if you do it for a small region, maybe you can use like one server. But once you really want to do that, like in large scale, maybe the data will not fit in the memory. You need to use some tiling, read the data by chunks. So you have different challenges here. But in essence, you have basically this division. So data reading and data writing, it's basically input and output bound, right? So you really need to, considering like data transfer, if the data is in a different server, you need to move it through the network and things like that. And you also have what is CPU bound. The prediction is mostly CPU bound. And if you are using some GPU models, some deep learning model will be like GPU bound, right? Like it's basically when you run the model, basically. So, and you have different strategies for that, right? So when we are talking about data reading and data saving, you can basically improve the hardware. So maybe we saw like it a lot. So reading from a SSD disk might be way faster than reading from a regular hard drive, right? You can have like faster software storage solution. You can have more memory, so you will read less data in once, and you can read in parallel and take some advantage of that. So this is basically strategies for optimize data reading and saving. And you can also reduce the prediction time with more hardware, right? More CPUs. So you can, if you want to predict multiple years, you can try to put all the years together and predict it at once, instead to predict each year separately, so you have less overhead in organizing the data. But there is something that is really interesting, and I just discovered a few maybe months ago. So it's basically what I call like compiled machine learning models. So you have some libraries that takes some machine learning model and try to create a kind of a binary version of that will speed up the prediction time. And here are 3 examples of library. Hummingbird, it's maintained by the Microsoft. There is this TL2CGen, not very fancy name also, and this Leaves. And all these models, they basically take some all these libraries take some machine learning model and optimize this for prediction. And the other optimization strategies we are implementing this package called scikit-map. So we are trying to piggyback in the scikit-learn here, but that's something that we are a library that we are developing, considering also the concepts that I'm explaining here in the talk. So, but let's back to this compiled model. So what it exactly means. So here's an example. So you have this random forest model, and this is basically an implementation in the scikit-learn. And here's like an example of code. You can train the model, you can save that, and the model will have basically multiple trees. So I'm bet that everyone here is a bit like familiar with the random forest concept. So and you have this, and you need to predict it. Scikit-learn, it's a very good implementation. It's quite fast to use parallelization, things like that. But you can make it faster if you compile the model. And that's a very kind of old technique that is basically this library converts every node from that tree. So every splitting node in an if-else. And that's what you are seeing here. And when you do that, this source code here, it's a source code that represents what you trained in the random forest in every tree. And when you have this source code, this can be like really thousands and thousands of lines. You can compile that. And once you compile, you have a compiled model that runs natively and use all the optimization aspects of like your CPU. So, and you can use like an Intel compiler that optimize this for C++ or C, so depending on the implementation, but this speeds up about 4 or 5 times the prediction time. And when we are talking about days of predictions, instead of run for 1 month, we will run for 8 days. That makes a lot of difference. So you also have strategies for that for light GBM. You have Hummingbird converts, for example, the artificial neural network, tensor works seamless with Torch. So that's a very nice approach that you can really use to speed up the prediction time. So when we use that for the maps that I will show. So, and basically, so we use that to in a real world application that here we use it to produce like a grassland map for the whole world in the Global Pasture Watch initiative. So this initiative, it's basically a consortium of researcher partners. So including people from US, Brazil, organizations from Europe like IASA, OpenGeoHub, IDIF from Germany, Cornell from US also. But it's mainly funded by the Land and Carbon Lab and the World Resources Institute. So, and without this solution that I showed to you, we couldn't, for example, produce the maps that I will show next. So that's kind of the an instance of the pipeline that I presented to you. So we did all this feature selection, hyperparameter tuning. We compiled the models here to run it in a very optimized way, and the results also it's available in cloud optimized GeoTip. So, and this run about like 120 CPU hours. We use it almost more than 7 terabytes of RAM using all the servers. And for who is familiar with the HTOP, this is basically what we call green bars. It means that you did a good job coding and you are taking advantage of all the CPU resources that you have. So, and how effectively do we run that? So basically we are relying on this infrastructure. So it's a high throughput data processing infrastructure. So we have several servers. We currently have about 3 petabytes of storage and communication between this computing service with the processing service. It's using some very fast network protocol. So we use Docker and Slurm to scale up the process and run different parts of the workflow in the prediction in different servers. So here's an example. So that's actually the tiling system that we use to run the grassland map. So it's almost 17,000 tiles. And basically we split these tiles across multiple servers. So this is basically the process about data reading, right? So we read the data, we compute the grassland maps, and we save it back in our storage solution. And as a storage solution, we are using some solution called COE-FS, that it's basically a kind of a self-deployed implementation of S3. So after we get the result back, and we basically use GDAL to build the cloud-optimized mosaics that I showed during the presentation. So here's an example. So this is basically like the cultivated grassland map of the world 2022. And this is the probability layer. So with this probability layer, we can select some specific probability threshold and say everything that is below, it's above this threshold, it's cultivated grassland. And we also mapped the natural and semi-natural grassland, same rationale, everything that is above this threshold, we can classify as natural and semi-natural grassland, and later we can integrate that. So basically, this threshold, we optimize it using some cross-validation strategy, and we basically balance it, the accuracy, considering recall and precision. So we try to avoid like bias in the classification, but really matching and optimize it for the F1 score. So we tested different thresholds and said, okay, considering these two thresholds and the models that we tested, we can assume that this threshold will be the best, and we take advantage of the probabilities. And with that, we basically create the dominant grassland map that we are seeing here. So, but this map, it's also time series. So, and it's starting 2000, the three products that I show. So basically, here we prepared it in cloud optimized GeoTIFF. We put it in the stack. So we also hosted in Zenodo the dominant class maps, and we put the URLs there. So we worked in the last weeks to also insert this in the Google Earth Engine, and now Google Earth Engine is really supporting seamless the cloud optimized GeoTIFF files. So we can host that in Google, and you can access directly in Google Earth Engine mosaics that are hosted, for example, in the Google Cloud Storage. And so here's like a pull request to pull the data in the official catalog. So WRI is helping to communicate with the Google Earth Engine, engineers and to host the data. And also the pipeline, it's available as a computational notebook. So you can just go here and see all the steps that we did. And of course, we also put the training data, but not only the training data, but the classification matrix that I showed in the beginning, right? So you can just download that, assume as a benchmark data set, and try to improve the accuracy. We did some hackathons considering, for example, this concept, like here's a classification matrix, and the participants can test different approaches. So the publication is out. So really by coincidence, it was out today. So it was a long process of revision, and we also had time to prepare all the kind of around the publication and make sure that everything is available and the users can really have access to all the assets that were produced. So, and now we are really trying to follow and understand also this kind of new trend of foundational models, right? So I just put a few of them. So here there are two examples. So, but we can now use, for example, these foundational models to integrate in the beginning of that pipeline and see it helps, right? So to be honest, I'm still not convinced with the foundational model. That's kind of my personal opinion, because what I see is basically what they explain is you can have like better results with less training data. But we also need to consider what are the kind of the implications in use that, right? So also depending on your data. So most of what I did here and I show here, like OpenGeoHub is working, it's based in a data set that we don't have a foundational model. So there are different implications of how to use that. But it's a trend. We definitely need to test and see how it will go. That might be the next frontier of machine learning applied toward observation data and spatial predictions. So just to wrap it up, here are kind of the main takeaways. So one thing that it's important to explain is there's a lot of Earth observation data, Sentinel, Landsat, Sentinel-1, as I mentioned, but most of this data there, it's not ready to do some analysis. So you still need to work a lot and build these kind of data cubes, these analysis ready and cloud optimized mosaics. So there are different terms for that, but in essence, you really need to prepare the data. So, and what we are trying to do here is expose some of this data that we are pre-processing to the community. So if someone wants to use the same Landsat that we are using to run this model, for example, it's available, right? So, and it's not necessary run the gap filling and everything like the same steps again. Of course, we need to make some decisions, right? So depending on the application, maybe this Landsat data will not fit. If you really want to do some like near real-time monitor, maybe that's not the data. But for historical analysis and most of the environmental monitoring applications, this can be really like an asset. So cloud native formats, protocols, I think they really came to stay. So the thing is, they are really the de facto standard. So this makes a lot of difference in the pipeline. So they are really in a kind of operational state. And if you organize the data in a proper way, you can really take full advantage. And to be honest, I don't see much organizations doing that. So people just get like some tile data and convert to cloud optimized GeoTIFF. What for me, it's a bit meaningless because you don't take the full advantage of all the structure that I show here. The data, the format is prepared for any kind of data set. We have mosaics with 300 gigabytes and works seamless. Can be like the limit is really the file size that the OS offers. So, and also like we have a lot of machine learning open source frameworks, but you really need to do like a lot of work in coding and prepare the data to take advantage of these general machine learning libraries. So that's what we are trying to do in the scikit map. And for our, there's also this SITS, satellite image time series. So we also have like at OpenGeoHub, the kind of the main developer of SITS, it's working there, and now we are integrating it with the OpenGeo. So it's a very nice solution also that kind of offers to our community the possibility to run spatial predictions. So we are really providing terabytes of ARCO data sets, so they can be easily accessed and integrated to the machine learning pipelines. We have different examples to show that. So if the image is publicly available, you can really access anywhere in the world and just do some prototype of testing there. And even Google Earth Engine is really working with the access to this cloud optimized GeoTIFFs now. So this is something new that I think they started offering maybe in the last year. And since they become commercial, they are really promoting that. So they can also, Google can also kind of make money selling the storage, but once the data is the Google infrastructure, you can easily link that with the Google Earth Engine. And also, so for the full reproducibility of this pipeline really depends on provided the input data, containers with libraries, better code abstraction, like reference data, and it's not only really about the publication. So that's something that we are really pursuing, and that we really believe that can make a difference for the scientific community and for different user communities in general. And yeah, here I finish my presentation, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Leandro. So I think it was a very informative presentation. So we have around 50 minutes for your questions. Are there any questions? Yeah. Yes. You can also briefly tell your name so that Leandro knows you. Okay. Thanks, Leandro. My name is Aditya. I'm yes, student in ITC. So my questions, I have two questions actually. So regarding the Global Pasture Watch workflow, you mentioned about the parallel processing. my first question is that, is there any specific strategies for parallelizations that can optimize the processing itself? That's my first question. And the second question is that, is there any kind of concern regarding the energy consumptions for processing those kind of very large data sets?
Like energy consumption?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah.
So the first one is, so in general, what we do is most of the processing for Earth observation data, right? It's per pixel, and we call like embarrassingly parallel.
Yeah.
So basically, you can literally, if you have like a CPU for all the pixels of the planet, you could have like one CPU processing single pixel, and it will be fast instantly, right? So it's easy to parallelize. So, but what we do is we split. So the first strategy is to split the work in these tiles, or your region, can be also Europe, right? So, and for every tile, we just send that tile to one server to process, and inside of that process, we implement multi-core parallelization. So we split across the servers, but inside of one server, we really try to optimize the workflow. And so the example that I show, when you compile the models, you can really speed up and use, for example, more cores. So the strategy, it's really simple. It's really this distributed, but also parallelized for every server. So, and we have full control because we are basically using our infrastructure. But for example, we have a partner that developed this for Sentinel and used the same approach to aggregate Sentinel data. So basically, he used the AWS to do exactly the same thing. So multiple virtual machines, you instantiate these virtual machines, and every virtual machine runs some Sentinel scene. You do all the computation, and you optimize that, and you save it back. So that's kind of in essence what we do. So about the energy consumption, so most of our infrastructure we manage by ourselves. And so we basically have this running co-location solution. So it's based in Ada. So we did some kind of like research to find what would be the best place. And there they had also some certifications about like green energy and things like that. But this is a kind of a very specific case from OpenGeoHub. I think about this energy consumption, it's really a more broader question, because so for example, now we have all these foundation models. They take a lot of energy, and also so and what is the implication of that? So for this, I don't have an answer. But one thing that I would like just to mention, we were talking with at the AGU with we were talking with Noel Gorick, one of the main developers of WorldCEREAL, and they said that now, like, Google is really trying to shrink the budget of the storage, but they are not shrink the budget for the computing. So, and maybe the computing is where really it's really taking more energy. So, so I think that's something that we really need to reflect and discuss. What are the implications?
Actually, we are working on this topic, energy efficiency in geocomputing in general, and actually we have some benchmarking systems available as a prototype, which can be used for the purpose. So we will be very happy actually to follow this discussion. Any other questions? Okay, then I have some questions.
Okay.
I can ask one, then maybe if you can. So you showed several machine learning techniques actually in your slides, and you also give the results. But I wonder also the computing time for these models. Did you see a significant difference between the models, and what's your take from computing performance or from computing time point of view? Actually, my understanding is 120,000 hours is for the complete work, which includes all testing all different types of models, right?
No, it's mostly prediction.
Prediction.
Yeah, just like so specifically in our infrastructure, the grassland maps took 8 days. So when we we use it like about 14 servers. So in each server is 1 terabyte of RAM and 96 cores. So, but For the grassland, we used the random forest. So it was basically, I think, 60 trees. And we had 2 models, one for each class of grassland. So, and for example, we just dropped it to 60 because it was, I don't know, 20–30% faster than 100 or more trees. But one thing that I noticed in general is, so basically so we also tested the gradient descendant trees, and so we tested the XGBoost and the light GBM. So in general, the light GBM is faster. So and now there's like 1 month ago, I just found that like this library leaves. So that's also compiled the light GBM. So in this way, it becomes like really fast, like the prediction time, right? So and this really makes a difference. But computing time, I would say the random forest is still a bit more computation than light GBM, and in general produce better results depending on the problem. But in general, we also tested the like regular artificial neural networks, right? And for that, the computing time is also okay. We can use some solutions also to compile that. But we do a lot of prototype and test also before the prediction. So we optimize and we try to see. So, and this is regarding only the models, but there are some other optimizations that when we read the data, we also want to read everything that we need to fit the model. So we have, I don't know, 100 variables, 20 years. So we really try to read everything. And now we have a kind of C++ wrapper that really takes advantage of multi-threading. So with Python, for example, we struggle a lot to use all the CPUs because of problems with parallelization that Python doesn't offer properly. So we also moved this to C++ and to write. So what I'm trying to say is every single step of that pipeline, we really try to optimize. So even like data transfer. So now we use InfiniBand instead to use Ethernet protocol, and with InfiniBand we can move about 30 times faster data. So we did also some benchmark in that. But modeling wise, I would say the faster is really the light GBM. So we always try to find like a good model first with the light GBM to see, okay, because with that we can really drop the prediction time. Okay. And the rest of the pipeline is kind of shared across the other solutions.
You mentioned the training activities that you perform, or this kind of optimization methods or techniques are covered by the training activities, or
yes. So we I forgot to put, but we also have, we are just launching now that we will have a summer school in August. So we are organizing it together with SURF, and it will be in Valiant. And it will cover basically 3 languages like Python, R, and Julia. And in these sessions, basically it's a variety of topics. But several people do this, but what we really try to do is we get with some data set that it's really ready to go, like, and we just focus in several methods. So we can apply that and see the performance. So like also the last talk that I did, we presented about we had a workshop about AutoML. So basically you just get like this library and you use this AutoML just to have some sort of, okay, that's roughly the best pipeline that I can use. And this is a starting point and you can optimize. So what we try to do is really cover all that steps, but with a very small data set so we can really understand it better and put the hands on data.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from an online attendee. The person is asking, do you also consider using deep learning models like CNN for your future work? So that is something.
Yeah, that's a very good and fair point, because so the thing is, so we tested some deep learning approach, and I also personally I have experience with UNet and like this semantic segmentation approach that I used in my PhD. So for some of the variables, it's really difficult to use deep learning. So because For example, for soil, it's mostly point data. So even that we could use some deep learning approach with some sparse optimization for the training data, it's a bit limiting. So for the grassland work that I show, we actually have training data that the analysts, they kind of draw the polygon. So we have for 1 by 1 kilometer area, we really have kind of polygons and regions where we can use that. So for the future, we definitely plan to test this grassland mapping with this what I call spatial explicit data, because this is a kind of a perfect input for the semantic segmentation approach, and we can also try to combine that with foundation model. But for me, the main issue is with deep learning, you need to have some reference data that it's in the context of environmental analysis, it's expensive to get with the structure that you need to use in a deep learning model, right? So we really need to have people drawing polygons and regions, or at least some kind of minimum density of points, and this is a bit limiting for the type of analysis that we are currently conducting.
Okay, actually, one question is about reproducibility, because at the beginning you showed a very nice picture, a slide actually, article only, and then gold standard, full reproducibility. But basically the workflow that we are talking about, yes, it can be open, all the data, all the software could be there, the data is already there, but replicating 120,000 core hours of work is quite challenging. So I think we should draw some lines for this reproducibility. So how do you see this for the work which involves this much big data?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the way that we try to tackle that is, so basically the production was really using all the data, right? And we computed also using our infrastructure, and so of course even the hardware it's very difficult to reproduce. So, but what we try to do is when we deploy the production work, we use basically a Docker image that we built ourselves. So the first step is really the Docker image. It's actually available. We post that in the Docker Hub. So you need to have the same environment that we use it. So that's something that, of course, the hardware is a bit tricky, but at least the environment you have all the libraries, same version and everything. So training data, as I mentioned, and also it's good to have some kind of tiles or areas where you can predict, because as I explained in the parallelization strategy, basically we run exactly the same code for multiple portions of data. So what we try to do, at least to provide this kind of maximum level of reproducibility that it's possible, is here, I don't know, 3-4 tiles, maybe one in Brazil, in Europe, and for that tiles you can really open the data, run the trained model. The models are also hosted in this model, right? Load that and run it using the same Docker. So with that, I think it's pretty close considering what we did. And also we put the code for the prediction. I also hosted in the GitHub. So of course it runs in our infrastructure, but it's documented there, right? All the minimum steps. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of one way to tackle that. But I think it's kind of close to the maximum that is possible, right?
So yeah, people interested needs to have a kind of infrastructure for the purpose. Yeah, that's great.
Lastly, there is one beyond the scope question. If we can take, or
yes, we can take.
Okay, but this is beyond the scope again. The person is asking: is it possible to use and integrate multi-sensor EO data using machine learning with climate and meteorological data sets to assess and predict short-term and long-term risks to vulnerable infrastructure? I know this lies very beyond.
Yeah, okay. I think the short question could be yes. I think so that it is possible, of course, but how to do it is maybe.
Yeah, but to use like, can you just repeat the question?
It's a pretty long question again. To integrate multi-sensor EO data using machine learning with climate and meteorological data sets to assess and predict short-term and long-term risks to vulnerable infrastructure.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it should be possible, but I think that the challenge is really communicate all this data source, right? And if you have like really in situ sensors and connect that, so there are some discussions what they call like kind of edge machine learning, right? You can also have like the models running some small devices and doing some prediction and basically aggregate that in a central system. So there are architectures for that. I don't have experience, but yeah, it should be possible.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Leandro, again, for this presentation.